walking through a cemetery, seeing gravestones, grave markers, is an interesting thing, although a lot of people don't like to do it because they say, I'm uncomfortable talking about death. But you know, the Hebrew Christian scriptures tell us it is appointed unto a person once to die, and after death comes the judgment. So that every one of us is going to face death. But today we're living in a time where, with discussions about health care reform, there's a lot of controversy over end-of-life decisions. Physician-assisted suicide, euthanasia, death with dignity. What are we supposed to do in light of this? And especially when major decisions are being made by politicians. You know, I looked in USA Today this very day, and I thought it was interesting. The cover story was dealing with this topic of end-of-life decisions, ethics. How are we to handle these kind of things? And then going right on the inside, you look a couple pages later, and here's more dealing with this same topic. End-of-life decisions. How are we to approach end of life? Well, today there's a lot of individuals in America, in Europe, in other countries that are trying to push for physician-assisted suicide. In England recently, they actually came up with 12 guidelines to help family members in dealing with the death of their loved one through physician-assisted suicide. Now, it's still illegal in Britain to assist somebody with suicide in death like this, but even the Royal Nurses Society recently changed from opposition to neutrality. These guidelines have been set in place. And in America, we're seeing the same thing with 78 million baby boomers, the aging of the population. People begin to say, well, maybe we need to consider how we can end people's lives in a quicker way and a more cost-effective way. Well, what are we supposed to do? There's a movie coming out with Al Pacino on the life of Dr. Kevorkian. Many of you may be familiar with him. But we've got to stop and say, how do we handle these kind of issues? I know in my own life recently, my wife and I actually put together a will. And when we did our will, what we did is actually wrote everything and made clear that this last will and testament had end-of-life directives. The National Right to Life has some very specific guidelines, and only 20% of Americans have any kind of end-of-life directives. What are we supposed to do with the end of life? Well, there's some things we should consider, and I know that when I was privileged to be with my mother at 87, my mom passed away, and she was in a nursing center, and she had some volunteer clowns all around her, and they were supporting her. My mom, like a kind of like a watch, the spring just wound down, and she expired. Now, what are we supposed to do in the light of somebody's death or impending death? Well, I think we need to, number one, make sure that we are always standing up for the sanctity of life. Life is sacred from the womb to the tomb. There's many people today that say, well, we shouldn't defend the right of the unborn. But you know, when you consider that this is a little 12-week-old little unborn baby, that's a human being. Heart is beating and wonderfully ready, potential. We as individuals must stand up for the sanctity of life. Whether it's a disabled person, a mentally impaired person, an unborn person, an elderly person, whoever it might be. And then number two, we should stand up and speak out for the unborn. Then number three, this is very important, we need to support politicians and civil authorities that are going to stand up for the sanctity of life. Life, like a candle, can be allowed to run its course and simply die. Or we can interfere with that process and try to expedite and hurry things in a way that can be harmful to many and try to extinguish that flame in a premature way. We need to stand up for human life. And also we must remember that we respect and honor those that are disabled, poor, helpless, mentally impaired, whatever it might be. Your life is on the line. You might say, well, this doesn't apply to me because that's when you get old. But think of Terry Schiavo, how they pulled the plug on her. Let's consider these things. How are we going to watch life? Wind down naturally? Or are we going to simply blow out that candle and extinguish it in some artificial way? These are issues that are impending and major, and we must be right on top of.